Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome back to Data Demo Day. Over the past couple hours, we've been working our way through demonstrations of some really interesting, compelling solutions. We've tackled data virtualization, we've tackled data catalogs, and next we're going to get into data integration. And we're going to talk to Matillion. If you're looking at data integration solutions, you need to have Matillion on your radar. They've been solving challenges with data and the cloud since 2011. Matillion provides powerful, easy-to-use data integration and ETL products. They can help organizations of all sizes integrate, transform, and data with 4 products. Matillion ETL for Amazon Redshift, Matillion ETL for Snowflake, Matillion ETL for Google BigQuery, and Matillion Data Loader. And we are joined today by Naval Bal, who is Solution Architect at Matillion. Thanks for joining us, Neville.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because you're batting cleanup, which means you're going to need to bring the big demo. And honestly, we've had some really interesting demos so far, and I've already seen the Matillion one, and I know it's outstanding. Before we get into it, though, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Matillion and why you're, busily working on their behalf.
Yeah. So I've been in the data space for about 16 years. So when I came across the product, I used it a little bit, and then I got the opportunity to work for the company. And just looking at the product, the enterprise level solution that we provide, it's a great product to be able to help customers adopt and get their data journey started with.
That's a common theme that we've heard so far through everybody. And it's always nice to hear that you not only are representing the product, but that you have a real, genuine belief in how it came about and why you're there. And obviously, being there 16 years, you've seen the evolution of Matillion. And I know you're going to get into a demo, but for the next half hour, why don't you take us through a little bit of an overview of Matillion, walk through the demo, and provide the inside look that we're all looking forward to, and then we'll come back in about a half an hour, and we'll connect with some questions and answers.
Yeah, sounds good. Happy to do that. Let me start sharing my screen here. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to be able to showcase Matillion at the Data Demo Day. I'm Naval Bal. I'm a solution architect at Matillion. I'm excited to give you guys an overview of Matillion, the company itself, product, and then walk you guys through the technical demo. The agenda for today, I'll just give a quick introduction of myself, my background. We'll do a quick overview of Matillion, walk you through some slides of what Matillion is and what value we bring to the customers, and then I'll walk you through a technical demo. And at the end, we'll go through a Q&A session. All right, so my background in the data space, as I said earlier, I've been a developer, I've been a lead developer, I've been an architect in various different organizations. The first 11 years of that journey was as a consultant. So I was fortunate enough to be able to work with various different technologies, ETL tools, databases, which really helped build that scope or variety of implementations in various different companies I've worked at. I've been working with cloud platforms for about 4 to 5 years now, and now I'm at Matillion, helping customers succeed in their cloud journey. All right, so let's look at the overview of Matillion. So what is Matillion? Matillion is a cloud-native ETL tool. So we help customers do the extract, load, as well as transform. We work on the ELT architecture, and we have products to connect to all the different cloud data warehouses. So Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, Synapse, and we recently released the Databricks Delta Lake product. The value that Matillion brings to customers is first simplicity. The UI is an intuitive UI where you have a drag and drop interface, which makes development very easy. Scale, and that just comes with Matillion being cloud native. Speed, the way Matillion is deployed in that cloud native fashion of the marketplace, you are deployed and up and running with Matillion within 15 to 20 minutes. And once you have it, you start developing, you start getting that quicker time to value with getting those in data. And then savings, we have a pay-as-you-go model, so you are only paying for what you use. What are the common challenges nowadays? Let's take a quick look at that. So most companies nowadays do not have one data source. There is multiple, and not just 2 or 3. There is like always a whole bunch of data sources that have those different types of data that the organization is looking at, wants to look at. And the challenge there is the variety of as well, meaning different file formats, different databases. And it's always a challenge with that much variety of data to integrate it and then to be able to transform it to make some insightful data structures that you can analyze. Volume of data is always increasing day by day. So you need a tool that can handle enterprise level volumes of data to help you get to those reporting structures. How does Matillion deploy? So Matillion is cloud native. So it sits right next to your cloud data warehouse, and it can connect to APIs, applications, different databases, and get that data as is. We call it ETL architecture. Get that data as is raw data into your cloud data warehouse. And once there, Matillion uses push-down transformations to transform that data, apply business rules, and create your persistent structures. All right, so let's get into the demo. Let me stop presenting and go to my Matillion UI. So this is the Matillion UI. I'm already logged in here. The first time when you're ready to get set with Matillion, the way you launch Matillion Cloud Native is you look for the product on the specific marketplace you're looking at. For the demo, I'm going to use Matillion ETL for Snowflake on the AWS platform. Hence, I'm on the AWS marketplace. You can click on continue to subscribe. It walks you through some steps to select your region, your instance sizing, your security groups, and creating that security control around the instance. And once you walk through that process, within 15 to 20 minutes, you should have an AMI that gets caught on EC2 instance that lives inside your VPC. So Matillion as a company does not have access to that data, does not have access to that instance either. It's completely under your control. Once that instance is up and running, you either take the IP address or the DNS for that instance and use a browser to point to it. Again, no client-side tools to install, completely browser-based access. The first time you log into the UI, you have to create a project group and a project. I have created my project already. And for each project, you create an environment. An environment in Matillion is that named saved connection to your Snowflake instance in this case. This is where you define what account on the Snowflake side you're connecting to, credentials you want to use to connect to it, as well as the defaults for the role, warehouse, base, and schema. These are just the defaults so that Matillion knows what to use if nothing else has been specified with each component. There is ways to change these or use different ones, and you'll see that as part of the demo in those specific components. All right, so once that is set up, let's look at the UI itself. The UI, it's pretty self-explanatory. The main section is the canvas. This is where you drag and drop different components. The components menu shows up towards the bottom left. This is where you see all the components and get a list of them. You can always type into the search option, search bar on the components menu to look for a specific component. Top left is where you see all the jobs and the folders that you create. The tasks tab at the bottom, right, is where you see feedback from the UI for actions you're performing as you develop within the tool. And last but not least, there is the properties menu, which it's not populated right now, but as I talk through this demo, you'll see we use that. Matillion being an ELT tool, there's two main types of jobs in Matillion. First is an orchestration job, which is up on the screen right now. The main function of orchestrations is there's actually two functions of orchestration. One is to control the process flow, manage your dependencies, and the second is to connect to the source, extract data, and load it into your cloud data warehouse. Once you have loaded that data, there's the second type of job, which I'm doing a nested call here too, which is a transformation job. And I can double click on it to go to that job. And a transformation job is when you have that raw data in Slate, you select that raw data, apply your transformation, apply your business rules, and create your persistent structures. I like to start on the transformations just because there's a lot of pipelining tools out there that do the extract and load decently well, but Matillion does the extract and load and also has robust transformation capabilities. So I like to start on the transformation as part of this demo. One quick note for this job, I'm assuming I've done my extract from the source and loaded that data into my Snowflake instance. It's raw data, but it's in Snow. All right, so let's look at this transformation job. So first up, as soon as I click on any component, you see that the properties menu gets populated. Now, my end goal with this transformation is to select some flights and planes data from my raw data schema on my Snowflake, apply some business rules, and create some aggregates for that data. So first up, I need to select that data. So I'm using a table input component. I'm pointing it to my database and schema using the environment default. I showed you earlier where you set that default in the environment, which is right here, and that's what it's using. You can always use the ellipsis next to that property and select a different database from this dropdown. You can also use variables to parameterize these properties. One thing to note right here, I just want to mention, is any properties you're seeing on the screen can be parameterized. So it gives you a very flexible way to use the different variables available in Matillion to parameterize these properties so that you can make code reusable. All right, so next up for schema, I'm also pointing to the environment default, but I can change that as well. And since I'm expecting an existing table to select from, I get this dropdown to select my source table. Once I do that, I get the column list to select specific columns. I have to pick all, but you can pick and choose columns in this case. Since we are using pushdown SQL, each component is going to build a part of the SQL and we are going to build and add pieces to it as we walk through this job. With the first component, we just did a select from the table. So I can see that my SQL tab shows me the select statement that got created. Let's look at the sample tab real quick, because I think this is a really useful feature, which is pretty unique to Matillion, where you can actually look at the data as you're walking through this process. As you're developing, it gives you an insight into the data you're working with. So I just selected data from the flights table, so I just see that data as is. But as I walk through this process, any transformation or modification I'm doing to this data, I'll be able to see it at that step of the process. You can also get a row count to see how much data you're working with. So with this first component, I have about 56.4 million rows. Next component here is a filter component, which lets me add filter conditions to filter my data. I've added two different conditions: cancelled is equal to 0, and elapsed time, actual elapsed time is greater than 0. What that does to the SQL is it adds that where clause to the SQL from the prior component. And this is that reference to the prior component, which I can expand using this checkbox at the bottom. Once I do that, I can see the full SQL that has been generated so far up to this point. Let's quickly validate the row count because I didn't change any data, but I did apply a filter. So let's look at that row count real quick. If you notice, my row count did go down from 56 odd million to about 55.3 million. So that's that quick validation that I can do as I develop, hence helping me walk through that process quicker, not have to wait to complete building the job and then try to run it, debug it, etc. It just, I can do it right then and there. Next, I want to join my main streams of data, which is the flight data, to some planes reference data. To do that, I'm going to use a different component here. Instead of the table input, I just have a SQL component. In a transformation job, the SQL component lets you write a select statement. I just have a select distinct star from raw planes. But what this enables you to do is if you have a control table that holds your SQL, which you want to pass to it as a variable, you have the option to do that to help you parameterize it, reuse this piece of code. Or it could be a use case of when you want to pass a where clause based on a variable, you can do that as well. All right, so let's look at that sample real quick for the planes data. It is just information about the planes based on the table number. And the SQL generated is what I had typed in that SQL property. Now that I have the two streams of data, I can join them. Let's look at that join component. With the join component, I'm selecting the main table as filter remove cancel, which is the prior component on the main stream, giving it an alias of F. In the joins, select planes as my join table, give it an alias of P, and then select the type of join I want to perform. You get a drop down to select that. In the join expressions, this is where I define how the two tables get joined on some what expression. I've just defined a simple expression here, but on this window, under the functions menu, you see the different categories of functions available to use. These are native to the cloud data warehouse you're connecting to, in this case, Snowflake. Because we're using pushdown SQL, we want to make sure that you are able to leverage any functionality that Snowflake provides. Hence, the list of functions that you get is native to Snowflake. If you click on a function, you get a syntax of how to use that function. As you may have seen so far, the tool is pretty intuitive. So we have a lot of times customers where people self-serve. So the BI team self-serves from reporting perspective. So they may not be completely proficient in SQL. So this gives them a good reference to use a certain function. They also have a link to the full documentation on the Snowflake side to look at examples of how to use that function. Again, providing that easy access to reference material. If there is user-defined functions, you will see them in that category as well. All right. So once I configure that, now I can select my output columns and define which output columns I want in my output from this component. Let's look at the SQL because this should add a left outer join to the SQL and give it those aliases that are defined, and then joins based on tail number. And the sample tab, again, quick validation of the join if it worked correctly or not. So I did a left join, so I do see there is some nulls, but I do see that my columns do show up as part of that join process. I can quickly also do a row count validation in the join just to make sure I don't have any Cartesian joins. So this is the same count with the after the component. So it gives me that validation. There is no Cartesian. I don't have to change anything with the join. The next component is a calculator component. In a calculator component, you can create expressions to define new calculator columns. My end goal with this job is to create aggregates and get the average of the delays. And I notice in my fields that my arrival and departure delays are varchars. So I'm going to use the QLA's function to handle my nulls and empties and convert them to a 0, and also convert the data type to a number. I'm doing that same thing for the arrival delay as well. This window looks pretty similar to that join expressions window, where you have those different categories of functions to use to build more complex expressions. Now that I create 2 columns, I want to sample that data so that I can validate if those calculations happened correctly. This also gives you a chance to actually do the calculation to make sure your formulas in the calculator were correct. So this gives me that 2 new columns at the end for the arrival and departure delays. Next up, I have an aggregate component. An aggregate component, I can select the groupings property, and I have selected year and month in that grouping property. In the aggregations, I am going to do a count of year and then the averages of the delays. You can choose any other aggregate type as well, whichever. All of these are the ones supported by Snowflake. This should completely change the structure of the data. So I'm going to, let's look at the sample. Now it aggregate that data, so it gives me year, month, count year, and the 2 averages. The last component is one of the write components in the Snowflake product. In this case, it's the table output component, which lets me truncate and load or blindly append to an existing table. I'm pointing it to the default warehouse database and schema on the Snowflake side. And for the target table, since it's expecting an existing table, it's going to give you a drop down to select that table name from. Once I do that, I can, in the column mappings, I can select what columns from the stream connects to or loads into what column in that table itself. The final SQL that you see on the SQL tab right here is the SQL that is going to get pushed down to Snowflake when this job executes. And if you notice, this is the SQL that we built throughout these different components, and this is that one final SQL that it created to run this transformation. All right, so just from a write component perspective, there is other options for writing data back to Snowflake. One of them is table update. With the table update component, you can create a merge statement. So based on the key, you can update or insert. And then there's rewrite table, which lets you drop and recreate an existing table every time job runs. And then there's create view, which, as the name suggests, just creates a view based on the SQL that's generated by the code. All right, that's it for transformations. Let's look at orchestrations. So orchestrations is where I loaded my that raw data for the flights and plane into Snowflake. This is where I will connect to my source systems, get that data into Snowflake before I run that transformation. So let's take a look at that. Snowflake has separate compute and storage. And compute on Snowflake is called a warehouse. And being as elastic as it is, Snowflake has a command called warehouse, which lets you change the attributes for that warehouse. In Matillion, you have the option to leverage that command by using the alter warehouse component. And this helps because you don't have, when you're running a Matillion load or a transformation, you don't have to explicitly go to Snowflake to change the warehouse. You can do it right here through Matillion. So I'm using the alter warehouse component because I know I have a load coming up, I have a transformation coming up. So I'm going to up the size of my warehouse to a large. I also have options to change any of the other properties for that warehouse as well. Once I do that, I'm going to use 2 create table components. These help me create my tables on Snowflake. So in this case, I'm going to use 2 of them to create my flights table and my planes table. With the create table, you have the option to create or replace, which is that replace option, create just blindly, or create if not exist. I'm pointing it to the database and schema which is defined in my environment defaults. And as an example here, for the table name, I'm using a variable. This is how you would reference a variable in any of the properties, where there's not a checkbox to say use variable. You just define it by typing in the variable name with after a dollar sign within curly brackets. And if I go to my Java variables, this is where I have that parameter defined, and I have a default value for it. So I'm creating that raw flights table. If I go back to that component, in the table type, you can select whether to create a permanent table, a temporary table, or a transient table. In the columns property, this is where you define the column list that you want to create the table with. You can use the plus sign and type in that column information by using this wizard, or you can also use text mode, which is just a tab delimited list of the column information. Next up, if you have any primary keys or clustering keys that you define for that table, you can do that here as well. What it's doing in the background is it's based on the properties, it's creating create or replace. I had selected the replace option, hence it did the create or replace, but it's creating SQL that gets executed on Snowflake. I'm doing that same thing with the second create table, the only difference being it's a different table and a different column list, this one being specific to the plain state. My data for flights is in file formats that live in an S3 bucket. I'm going to use the S3 load component to leverage or connect to that S3 bucket, read those files, and load them into Snowflake. So with this component, I have I'm pointing it to the S3 object I'm connecting to, which is my S3 bucket. And then in the pattern, I'm going to give it the search criteria. So I'm looking at the path of flights and then looking for files, start with the name 20. My flights data is in formats of 2000.csv, 2001.csv, etc. So this would search for all the files that match that pattern and load that into Snowflake. Next, I'm defining what warehouse database scheme I'm connecting to on the Snowflake side, and then defining the table name that I want to populate with this data. The different file types supported with this component are CSV, Arrow, JSON, all the ones here on the screen. So most of the commonly used file types are supported by this component. The rest of the properties around delimiters, formats, what compression to use, etc. So once you define all of these properties, in the background, it's creating a copy into command. Copy into is considered the most efficient way to bulk load data into Snowflake, and we leverage that component by creating a command. So when you execute this component, it runs that copy into on Snowflake to leverage that best practice. My plains data is on an RDS database of type MySQL. This component is specific to RDS, but we do also have a database query component, which I just bring on the screen for a little bit. And the database query supports connecting to any database that has a JDBC type port. If you do not have the product doesn't pre-install with a few of the drivers for the commonly used databases. If you do not have that driver, you can easily upload that driver by going to manage databases in the admin menu. Both of these components, the RDS query versus the database query, they work in a very similar fashion. Let's walk through the RDS query real quick. With the RDS query component, you'll select the database type and then point it to the RDS endpoint. With the database query, you would select the driver to use and then provide the URL based on how the driver is expecting it. You select the database name and then pass the credentials. With either of these components, you have the option to use basic mode, which would just read the system tables or the information schema tables on the source side and give you a list of tables to select from. With advanced mode, you can actually type in a select statement or SQL that you want to execute to source that data. This is again similar to that SQL component in a transformation job. This again is helpful if you want to pass certain parameters to select or certain parameter to add a fair cost to the select where you want to restrict how much data you're pulling in from the. Next, in the JDBC options, you can pass any driver-specific parameters that you want to have while selecting data and connecting to your host database. The warehouse database schema, this is the target that you want to load that data into. So with that, I'm still pointing to the environment defaults, selecting raw plain as the table to load. And then it's asking me for a staging property. With the Snowflake product, you have the option to use a Snowflake managed staging or to use an existing Amazon S3 that you may have in your account. Why does it do that? So just to understand the architecture of the component, when you run this component, it is connecting to your source system, in this case, the source RDS MySQL database, extracting that data or selecting that data, streaming it to create files in that staging location, whether it's Snowflake managed or a S3 bucket, and then leveraging that best practice of using the copy into to use those files to load that data into Snowflake. All right. So once that data is in Snowflake, then you use that transformation transformer. From connectors to different applications, we do have about 85 plus connectors specifically built for a few of the common applications out there. For example, we have Bings connectors, we have a box connector, we have few for Dynamics, we have some Google specific connectors. There is Marketo, NetSuite, etc. As you can see in this. And this list is easily available on Matillion.com. If you select the product, you should be able to get a complete list of these native connectors. What the native connectors do is they are still connecting using that API layer that the applications provide. Because the native connector built out, it parses the API response into a tabular format, making it easier for you to load it into Snowflake. Let's look at the Salesforce query component as an example. With the Salesforce query component and few of the other applications, the authentication is dependent on what the application supports. So with Salesforce, you have OAuth and username password as the available options. There is a one-time setup to let the application know that Matillion is connected to it. So that's the setup of OAuth with a combination of Matillion and the application. But once you have that, you select that authentication and connect to it. You can pass connection options based on what is supported for that application. And what you get is in the data sources, you get a list of sources to select from. These would have been the different endpoints on the if you were using the API there. But since you get a list, it's much easier to just select one. So in this case, I'm just going to use domain. And once you select that data source, what would have been elements of a JSON response, they show up as columns. So I can pick and choose those columns or just select all of them like I've done here. So the native connector helps parse that application API response and convert it into that tabular format. I'm pointing it to the warehouse database schema on Snowflake using my environment defaults. And in the target table, I'm going to define what table I want to load with this component. This component does also leverage that staging area. So I can select existing S3, or I can select Snowflake managed in this case as well. So the architecture remains the same. It extracts that data from Salesforce, streams it to create files on S3, and then uses copy into to load it into Snowflake. There is load options that you modify to manage how you manage the load and how that works. Is the first option here is clean stage files, which means the files that get created on that S3 as that temporary staging do get cleaned up by default because this property is set to 1. For certain use cases where you want to start building a data lake in your file storage, you can set this to off and use the appropriate relevant file prefix and start building that data lake as you load data into Snowflake. There's also options to control how you want the target table to be, whether you want the target table to be recreated every time this runs. So it gives you options how you manage that raw staging area on Snowflake, as well as your file storage. All right, so now that I've done the extract and load from all my source systems, next I'm just using one of the flow components, which is called an AND component, which tells the job to wait for the 3 different components to finish before it calls the nested transformation walkthrough. And once I run the transformation, at the end, I can change my use the alter warehouse component to change my warehouse size back to a small. Because we are in the AWS platform, I'm going to open one more job. If you had, you may have already noticed, but any of these orchestration components, when I click on that, it shows these 3 cells. So you have options to connect the next component based on a success, a failure, or an unconditional completion. This job just gives an example of how error handling works in the team. So based on certain components and failures you want to handle, you can connect the next component or have a process, whether it's a different orchestration or a different component or just a component specifically for one of those AWS services. That is how you would create your error handling and logging as well. So with this example, on the success of that one demo EL, which is the nested orchestration I'm calling, I'm using a CloudWatch publish component to publish to a CloudWatch service. I can also use SNS on a failure to send a message, or I can post to an SQSQ. One thing to note here is with orchestrations, you can also have nested orchestration runs or transformation runs. So that gives you the ability to categorize or segregate your loads into different orchestrations, and then based on how you want to call them through a parent orchestration that calls your different child processes. Let's talk about scheduling. There is an inbuilt scheduler within Matillion under the project menu. If you go to manage schedules, you have an inbuilt scheduler, which is a cron-like scheduler. So if I click on the plus sign, I can name the schedule. I can enable or disable it using this checkbox. At the top, you can define when a certain thing needs to run based on the time zone that you select. At the bottom, you can define what version and what job needs to run using which environment. It makes it easy to schedule Matillion workflows right here from within the tool. While we are talking about triggering Matillion jobs, a different way of triggering a Matillion job is by listening on an SQSQ. So Matillion does have a component to post to an SQS. It can also listen on an SQSQ to trigger a Matillion job. Matillion does also have an API layer, which has a whole variety of endpoints, a whole range of endpoints. Some of them for exporting jobs, importing jobs, exporting schedules, updating environment variables. There is also endpoints where you can specify the project name and the job name, and you can trigger Matillion workflows using that API. That gives you the flexibility of having an orchestration. If you already have an orchestration or a scheduling tool, you can leverage that API to trigger Matillion jobs. On instance sizes large and above, Matillion does have some enterprise features. These are features, as I said, that are available on any of the platforms, but on instance sizes large and above. The first one is under the project menu, you do have Git integration from the tool. This lets you initiate your local repository, and then it asks you to connect to your remote repository. This gives you a way to have that code repo on a remote repository. Once you set this up, you have the option to push code, fetch code, create branches, merge branches, all that Git specific steps and functions right through the tool, right through Matillion, through this UI. One of the other enterprise features is granular permissions. What that lets you do is there is certain groups built in to the product that come in pre-installed with the product, but you can create custom groups. And within each group, you have the ability to change at a very granular level uh, the who or the users of the group, what can they do or cannot do within the product. So for example, we spoke about OAuth for some of the native connectors. You can choose only a certain group that has access granted to create OAuth or delete OAuth. Gives you much more control, plus segregation of which users can do what within the tool. One of the other enterprise features is concurrent connections. So if I go to my environment and go to that last section where I selected my defaults, you see this property for concurrent connections. I am on a large instance, so my concurrent connection can go up to a maximum of 4. And what that lets me do, as the tooltip suggests, is it is the number of connections or sessions that one single job can use to connect to Snowflake, and the number of threads available per job. How that helps is, let's say I go back to my orchestration job. If you notice, I have those 3 parallel streams. All of these are connecting to Snowflake, so that lets me have 3 different jobs using 3 different sessions to connect to Snowflake, hence increasing the concurrency or the parallelism that is used during running a job. One other enterprise feature is auto documentation, and this is really helpful because if you right-click on the job, I'm going to use the transformation as an example. I can click on generate job documentation, and what that does is creates an HTML file, and if I open it, it has the documentation, and it starts at the top level, so it gives you a screenshot of the flow of the process, and then digs into each and every component and how the properties are set up for that component. Gives you a quick 1-second right-click way of getting documentation out while passing on jobs from team to team or just from a knowledge transfer perspective. All right, that's all I have for the demo.
Neville, thanks very much. That was great. Appreciate the depth that you went into. One of the interesting things that I think is noteworthy about Matillion is this idea that you're actually crowdsourcing development or feature development through Matillion community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we have a user community where you can, we have a couple of things. We have a user community where people share their ideas. People go through, it's almost like a forum-like setup where you can post questions. Some other user might have an answer for that. They can come answer those questions. We also do have an ideas portal. And that's where customers can actually connect and submit their ideas for enhancements. And our team closely monitors that queue or that portal just to get ideas based on customer feedback of what can be improved within the product.
Well, and just in the recent release of 1.5, there were a couple of features that came directly from the community. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. I don't know the exact features, but there were a couple of features that got added based on the community. And that's true for every release, to be honest. It is one of the major things that the product team looks at for getting ideas in and using them in the development and the releases.
Well, another interesting thing is effectively you're fairly transparent with pricing. You've got pricing on the website, and people can certainly go to matillion.com and check out the pricing. But over and above that, where are you finding traction with Matillion, given the kind of specific places that you're that you're attempting to integrate?
So first, I'll answer the first piece of the question. So from a pricing perspective, right, that's just the cloud native nature of Matillion. It's a pay-as-you-go model. You spin up an instance for if you pay only for when the instance is on, and hence gives you a much more cost-effective way of having a tool which does end-to-end. So right from extracting data to loading it to transforming it, you have an enterprise solution, but you're also using that as-you-go model. Just from that pricing perspective, based on your usage, there is other options for signing up for an enterprise level contract as well, which you can consider or customers can consider once they progress with Matillion, mature with Matillion, and need more instances as they proceed in their journey. And the second piece of the question, from an adoption perspective, just given the nature and the ease and the scope or the functionality that Matillion covers, we have customers from so many very different small, large customers, enterprise level customers. We have small companies, startups that use Matillion. Plus, from a perspective of usage, because we have those 85 plus connectors, there is a variety of use cases that we can solve by using when customers use Matillion. And that's where we mainly see the adoption from, along with that cloud native modern architecture.
So one of the questions we've got is what if I don't need data transformation yet?
That's actually a great question. So we do have a product called Matillion Data Loader that is available for customers to use. And it's a free product that gets you going on your cloud data journey. And that's a good way of testing, of sourcing data, getting into a cloud data warehouse, trying it out before you need that transformation. And once you're at a point where you know that you can load data, it's the cloud data warehouse is the direction you want to go, that's when you can then consider Matillion ETL for your end-to-end processing.
So that's interesting. So are you finding that to be the typical path that people are taking? Is that kind of free trial to then an engagement?
Not always. It is a good way for companies that are not cloud familiar yet to adopt and try out the cloud before they invest in a tool which is an end-to-end tool. So that just gets, that's almost like a gateway into the cloud and to get a sense and of the cloud. We have a whole list of customers that directly adopt Matillion ETL, and that's just because the way it's deployed, the security aspect of it, that it's within your control, and the end-to-end functionality.
Another question that's come in, can you script in Matillion?
You can. Matillion does actually have script components. In the orchestrations I showed, there is actually a SQL script component, which lets you write SQL that runs on Snowflake. So you can do your DDLs through that component. You can have execute stored procs on Snowflake using that component. There is also a script component for Python and Bash. So if you have a specific use case where you want to do some Python coding to maybe split a file before you load it, or certain use cases that Python might do easier, you have that option as well.
So just curious, as we're wrapping things up, what are you looking forward to in the new year as we head through this particular transformation?
So we keep enhancing the tool as we go, right? And some of the enhancements I'm looking at in the roadmap, the adoptions, the new products we released. So we recently released Matillion ETL for Databricks Delta Lake. Earlier in the year, we released the product for Azure Synapse, and we are seeing more adoption of those products as we go along, as we had in Q3, Q4. So going forward, those two new products along with the existing products, it's going to be a great journey. It's going to be awesome to be a part of the journey.
Well, Neville, thank you very much for your time today. We certainly would encourage everybody to check out Matillion, go on their website. Again, there's lots of interesting information there, including pricing. And as you're heading down your cloud journey, I think Matillion is certainly a solution that you should consider to be part of that. So thanks very much, Neville. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome. Glad to be here.
Sure. With regard to where we're headed with Data Demo Day, next year we're going to be doing a whole series of Data Demo Days. This has been a very interesting offering for us, providing all kinds of interesting insights. We hope you got something out of the 3 hours of these tours down these technologies, certainly very interesting. And we would also encourage you to go to solutionsreview.com and check out all of the information that we have on our analytics and BI sites, certainly covering a lot of this in a variety of formats, including certainly posts, but videos as well. And we want to thank you very much for all of your time today. It was certainly a pleasure of ours to put this together, and we'll look forward to doing another one very soon. Thanks very much.